Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
Picture this. It's October in New York, one of those crisp autumn days when the light hits just right and every photographer in the city thinks they're Ansel Adams. I'm 26, already making waves in fashion photography despite her maybe. Because of my father's connections. Richard Bryant, CEO of Bryant Studios, the man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. The weight of his name both opened doors and trapped me behind them. I'd been shooting all morning. For Luminous magazine, another sterile spread about autumn elegance or some equally forgettable theme. The kind of work that paid well but left my soul feeling as empty as the model's practice stairs. I was packing up my equipment, already mentally rehearsing my excuse to skip my father's charity gala that evening when she walked in. Gwendolyn. Alexander. I'd heard the whispers, of course. The industry loves its gossip almost as much as it loves its impossible beauty standards. Difficult, unprofessional, too political. All code words for a woman who dared to have opinions and the audacity to voice them. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for the reality of her presence. She moved like liquid confidence. All curves and sharp edges wrapped in worn denim and a vintage band tee that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her dark hair caught the studio lights as she surveyed the space with the kind of calculated assessment that made me realize she was evaluating more than just the lighting setup. Victoria Bryant, she said, and my name sounded different in her voiceless corporate legacy, more possibility. I've seen your work, the magazine spreads. I asked, already cringing at the thought of her judging me by those sanitized, soul-crushing commissions. No. Her smile was sharp, knowing. The real work. The series you did on Brooklyn nightlife. The one your father made you bury. My hand stilled on my camera case. That series had been my love letter to authenticity, raw, unfiltered moments of genuine human connection. I captured drag queens mid-transformation, couples stealing kisses in dive bar corners. The beautiful chaos of people being unapologetically themselves. My father had seen 3 photos and threatened to cut off my trust fund if I ever exhibited them. How did you? Maya's girlfriend is a bartender at Tender Trap. She showed me the shots you took that night in July. Gwendolyn stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something warm and mysterious that made my head spin. They were beautiful, honest, everything your magazine work isn't. The criticism should have stung, but coming from her, it felt like validation. Like someone finally understanding the cage I'd built around myself with telephoto lenses and professional distance. I have a proposition, she continued, and something in her voice made my pulse quicken. Forget the magazine. Forget what you think you should be shooting. I want you to photograph me. Really photograph me. No art director, no client breathing down your neck, no one's vision but yours. 3 days later, I found myself in Gwendolyn's loft in Dumbo, my hands shaking as I set up my equipment. The space was everything my sterile studio wasn't warm. Brick walls covered in original artwork, plants cascading from every available surface, vintage furniture that looked like it had stories to tell. It felt like stepping into someone's soul, intimate and overwhelming. Nervous? Gwendolyn asked, emerging from her bedroom in a simple white robe that somehow looked more elegant than any designer gown. Should I be? I countered, adjusting my camera settings for the 3rd time. That depends. She settled onto the velvet couch by the window, where afternoon light painted golden stripes across her skin. Are you planning to photograph what you think people want to see, or what's actually here? It was a challenge and an invitation rolled into one. I raised my camera, looked through the viewfinder, and for the first time in months, really saw my subject. Gwendolyn wasn't performing. She wasn't posing or pretending or projecting some manufactured version of beauty. She was just present. Real. The light left her face, highlighting the constellation of freckles across her nose, the laugh lines that spoke of genuine joy, the scar on her chin from a childhood accident that most photographers would edit out. Click. That first shot unguarded, unfiltered, absolutely perfect, would later become the center of our entire exhibition. But in that moment, it was just the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. We shot for hours. Sometimes she talked, telling me about growing up in Vermont, her mother's battle with addiction, her decision to move to New York with nothing but a suitcase and stubborn determination. Sometimes we worked in comfortable silence, the only sounds the soft click of my shutter and the jazz playlist she'd put on to set the mood. As the sun began to set, painting the loft in shades of amber and rose, something shifted. The professional. Distance I'd always maintained dissolved like sugar in rain. When she suggested we take a break, I found myself accepting the glass of wine she offered, sitting beside her on that same velvet couch where I'd captured my first real photograph. In years. "Can I see?" she asked, nodding toward my camera. I hesitated. Showing someone their photos mid-session broke every professional rule I'd ever learned. But then again, this entire afternoon had been about breaking rules. I handed her the camera and watched her face as she scrolled through the images. Her expression shifted from curiosity to surprise to something deeper, more vulnerable. "Jesus, Victoria," she whispered, pausing on a shot where she was laughing at something I'd said. Head thrown back, completely unguarded. "Is this really how you see me?" "It's how you are," I said softly, "when you're not trying to be anything else." She looked up at me then, and in the fading light of her loft, I realized we'd crossed an invisible line. This wasn't just a photo shoot anymore. This was something else entirely. What started as one session became 2, then 5, then a weekly ritual I began to crave like coffee or oxygen. Every Tuesday afternoon, I'd show up at Gwendolyn's loft with my cameras and leave with something more precious than images, pieces of understanding, fragments of connection, the slow building architecture of intimacy. She never asked to see the photos anymore. She trusted me completely, and that trust was more intoxicating than any drug. In return, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't since childhood. About the pressure of living up to the Bryant name, about feeling like a fraud in my own career, about the loneliness of success that wasn't really mine. "You know what your problem is?" she said one Tuesday, sprawled across her bed in nothing but an oversized sweater and afternoon light while I captured the way shadows played across her legs. "Enlighten me," I said, adjusting my focus. "You think everyone else's opinion matters more than your own." She propped herself up on her elbow, fixing me with that direct gaze that always made my breath catch. "When's the last time you took a photograph just because you wanted to? Not because someone was paying you, not because it would look good. In your portfolio, just because something moved you?" I lowered my camera, considering. Honestly, that night in Brooklyn, before my father shut it down. "So why'd you let him?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Why had I let him? Fear, probably. Comfort and conformity. The golden handcuffs of family expectation and financial security. "It's complicated," I said finally. "No," Gwendolyn sat up fully, her sweater sliding off one shoulder in a way that would have made a beautiful shot if I hadn't been too distracted by her words. "It's simple. You're just scared to want something. For yourself." She wasn't wrong. I'd spent so long being what other people needed. The dutiful daughter, the reliable photographer, the safe choice, that I'd forgotten how to be what I needed. What if I disappoint people? What if you disappoint yourself instead? That night, after I'd developed the film in my makeshift darkroom, I couldn't stop staring at the photographs. Not just because Gwendolyn was beautiful, though she was, devastatingly so, but because they captured something I'd never managed before. Truth. Unvarnished. Uncompromising truth. In one image, she was reaching for something just outside the frame, her expression focused and determined. In another, she was curled up with a book, completely absorbed, a strand of hair falling across her face. Each photograph told a story, and together they created a narrative more compelling than any fashion spread I'd ever shot. But it was the last image on the roll that stopped me cold. Somehow she'd managed to turn the camera on me without my noticing. I was looking at something off camera, probably her, with an expression I'd never seen on my own face before. Open, vulnerable, happy. I'd been so busy documenting everyone else's truth that I'd forgotten what my own looked like. It happened on a Thursday, which somehow made it worse. Tuesdays were our days, safe and scheduled and contained within the boundaries of our professional arrangement. But Thursday was uncharted territory, which made the text message at 10 p.m. both thrilling and terrifying. Emergency wine situation at my place. Bring that vintage red you're always bragging about. I should have said no. Should have maintained the boundaries that were already blurrier than watercolors in the rain. Instead, I grabbed the bottle of 1982 Bordeaux my father had given me for my 25th birthday and headed to Brooklyn. I found Gwendolyn on her fire escape, wrapped in a blanket and staring out at the Manhattan skyline like it might hold answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. The emergency, it turned out, was a phone call from her mother 3 years sober and asking for money for groceries at 9 p.m. on a Thursday. I said no, Gwendolyn told me after I'd climbed out to join her with 2 glasses and the wine. First time in my life, I actually said no. How does it feel? Terrible, necessary, like maybe I'm finally growing up. She accepted the glass I offered, her fingers brushing mine in a way that sent electricity up my arm. Thank you for coming. I know it's not our usual day. Maybe that's good, I said before I could stop myself. Maybe we don't always have to stick to the schedule. She turned to look at me then, and in the glow of the city lights, I saw something shift in her expression. Victoria ... quote. I know, I said quickly. This is probably a bad idea. Professional boundaries and all that. That's not what I was going to say. What were you going to say? She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. I was going to say that I've been thinking about you, not just on Tuesdays. Not just when you're taking my picture, all the time. She took a sip of wine as if she needed courage for what came next. And I know that probably makes things complicated, but I needed you to know. My heart stopped, started, and then began beating so fast I was sure she could hear it over the traffic below. Gwendy, ELYN ... You don't have to say anything, she said quickly. I've been thinking about you too, I interrupted, the words tumbling out before I could lose my nerve. Every day. Every night. I take your pictures and then I go home and stare at them for hours. And it's not because I'm proud of the composition or the lighting. It's because I miss you the second I leave. The silence that followed was different from before, charged, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. So, what do we do now? She asked. I set down my wine glass and reached for her hand. Her skin was warm despite the October chill, and when she didn't pull away, I felt something inside my chest unfurl like a flower finding sunlight. Now, I said, we stop pretending this is just about photography. Our first kiss happened at 2:47 a.m. on that same fire escape, with Manhattan glittering below us like scattered diamonds. I know the exact time because later, when I developed the film from that night, yes, I'd brought my camera even to her emergency. There was a shot of her watch as she reached for my face. numbers glowing green in the darkness. It wasn't like the movies. There was no soundtrack, no perfect lighting, no choreographed moment of romantic inevitability. It was messy and real and perfect in its imperfection. She tasted like wine and possibility, and when she whispered my name against my lips, I felt like I was hearing it for the first time. I've wanted to do that since the first day you walked into my loft, she confessed afterward, forehead pressed against mine. Why didn't you? Same reason you didn't. Fear. Her laugh was soft, self-deprecating. Funny how we can be brave with our art, but cowards with our hearts. We went inside after that, abandoning the wine and the view for the more intimate landscape of her bedroom. But we didn't sleep together that night, not in the way you might think. Instead, we lay in her bed fully clothed, talking until sunrise about everything and nothing. About her dreams of starting her own sustainable fashion line. About my secret desire to document social justice movements. About the weight of other people's expectations and the terrifying freedom of choosing your own path. As dawn broke over Brooklyn, painting her room in shades of pink and gold, I realized this was the most intimate I'd ever been with another person. Not because of physical closeness, but because for the first time in my adult life, I was allowing myself to be truly seen. Of course, secrets in our business never stay secret for long. The fashion industry thrives on gossip and speculation, and a successful photographer suddenly spending all her free time with a difficult model was exactly the kind of story people love to whisper about. The first hint of trouble came 3 weeks later during what should have been a routine client meeting at my father's office. Richard Bryant had built his empire on reading people, on knowing which way the wind was blowing before it started. So when he called me in to discuss recent concerns, I knew exactly what was coming. The Alexander girl, he said without preamble, not even bothering with pleasantries. I'm hearing stories. What kind of stories? I asked, though my heart was already sinking. The kind that could ruin careers. Both of yours. He leaned back in his leather chair, the Manhattan skyline spread behind him like a power display. She's trouble, Victoria. Always has been. Too political, too unpredictable. And now these rumors about her personal life. What rumors? His smile was cold, calculating. The lesbian thing was always whispered about, but now people are saying she's involved with someone in the industry. Someone whose career could suffer by association. I felt like I was drowning in slow motion. And you think that someone is me? I don't think anything. But I know what's good for business and scandal, isn't it? Drop her. Whatever you two have going on, professional or otherwise, end it. No. And if I don't, then you can explain to your other clients why the Bryant name is suddenly associated with controversy. See how many bookings you get when Vogue decides you're more trouble than you're worth. I left that meeting feeling like I was going to throw up. The threat was clear. Choose Gwendolyn or choose my career. In Richard Bryant's world, there was no middle ground, no compromise, no room for inconvenient truths like love. I drove to Gwendolyn's loft in a haze, my hands shaking as I climbed the familiar stairs. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. What happened? I told her everything. About my father's ultimatum, about the whispers, about the impossible choice I was being forced to make. With each word, I watched her expression grow more guarded, more distant, until she looked like a stranger wearing Gwendolyn's face. So, what are you going to do? She asked when I'd finished. I don't know, I admitted. This is my career, Gwen. Everything I've worked for. Right. Her voice was carefully neutral. Your career. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. She stood up abruptly, walking to the window where we'd shared so many intimate moments. You know what? This is my fault. I Should have known better than to think someone like you could choose someone like me over daddy's approval. That's not fair, isn't it? She turned back to face me, and I saw tears glittering in her eyes. You've spent our entire relationship hiding, scheduling me like a dentist appointment, making sure no one sees us together. And now, the second there's actual pressure, you're already weighing your options. I came here to talk to you about it. You came here to ask me to make this easy for you, to disappear quietly so you don't have to actually make a choice. Her laugh was bitter broken. Well, congratulations. Choice made. She walked to her door and held it open. I think you should go. Gwendolyn, please. Go, Victoria. Before someone sees your car in my neighborhood and starts more rumors, I left because I didn't know what else to do. Because she was right and we both knew it. Because I was a coward who had never learned how to fight for what I wanted. It would be 2 weeks before I saw her again, and by then, everything would be different. The photograph that changed everything was never supposed to exist. I'd taken it the morning after our first night together, not the night we kissed on. The fire escape, but weeks later, when we finally crossed that last line between friendship and something more profound. She was sleeping in my bed, morning light streaming through my loft windows, and she looked so peaceful, so beautiful, that I couldn't resist capturing the moment. It was art in its purest form, intimate, honest, vulnerable. Her back curved like a question mark, sheet draped artfully across her hips, face turned toward the light with an expression of complete serenity. I titled it Muse Unretouched and saved it in a private folder on my personal laptop, never intending to share it with anyone, but technology, like love, rarely follows our intentions. The hack happened on a Tuesday or all day, which felt like cosmic irony. A disgruntled intern at Bryant Studios, angry about unpaid overtime and my father's legendary temper, decided to teach the family a lesson by accessing my cloud storage and releasing selected images to a gossip blog. I found out when my phone started buzzing at 6 a.m. with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. By the time I was fully awake, Muse Unretouched was trending on 3 social media platforms and my private. Instagram had gained 10,000 followers. Overnight, the response was immediate and polarizing. Art lovers called it a masterpiece of intimate photography. Conservative commentators labeled it pornographic. The LGBTQ+ community embraced it as a celebration of queer love. My father's business partners called it a professional disaster. But it was Gwendolyn's reaction that mattered most, and that came in the form of a text at 7:23 a.m. We need to talk. Now, I found her at her loft, pacing like a caged animal. She'd already fielded calls from her agent, her publicist, and 3 different magazine editors, all with the same message. The photograph was beautiful, but it was also career suicide. Did you know? She asked without preamble. When you took it, did you know it would end up online? Of course not, I said, horrified that she would even think that. Gwen, I would never, but you took it without asking. The accusation hit like a physical blow. You were awake. You smiled at me when I picked up the camera. I smiled because I trusted you. Because I thought it was just for us. She was right, and we both knew it. I had violated something sacred, the unspoken agreement that what happened between us stayed between us. The fact that it was an accident didn't change the impact. What do you want me to do? I asked. I can't take it back. I can't make it unhappen. I know. She stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. But maybe we don't want to take it back. What do you mean? I mean, maybe this is our chance. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. Everyone's talking about us anyway. Everyone has an opinion about who we are and what we represent. So why don't we control the narrative? Gwendolyn, No, listen, what if we don't apologize? What if we don't hide? What if we own this completely? She grabbed my hands, her excitement infectious. You said you wanted to document truth. I said I wanted to challenge beauty standards. This is our opportunity to do both. Real Women, Real Love opened 6 weeks later in a converted warehouse in Queens. We'd self-funded the exhibition using Gwendolyn's modeling savings and the trust fund I'd finally decided to access for something meaningful. Every photograph in the show was unretouched, unfiltered, unapologetically honest. The collection included the leaked image that started it all, but it was surrounded by dozens of others women of all ages, sizes, and backgrounds, captured in moments of genuine intimacy and joy. Some were nudes, some were clothed, but all of them challenged conventional beauty standards in different ways. The centerpiece was a series I'd titled Gwendolyn Unguarded, all the photographs from our Tuesday sessions. The visual diary of our relationship developing alongside her trust in my camera. Seeing them displayed together told a story neither of us could have planned. The evolution of intimacy, the power of being truly seen. Opening night was chaos. Protesters gathered outside, upset about the nude photography and the celebration of queer love. Inside, celebrities, artists, and activists mingled in equal measure. The press was everywhere, documenting both the artwork and the public's reaction to it. My father didn't come. I'd invited him, more as a gesture than because I expected him to show up, but his absence felt like its own kind of presence, a reminder of everything I was choosing to leave behind. Any regrets? Gwendolyn asked during a rare, quiet moment, as we watched people examine our work with expressions ranging from fascination to disapproval. Only that it took us so long to get here, I replied. The exhibition was only supposed to run for 2 weeks. Instead, it stayed open for 3 months, with lines wrapping around the building every weekend. We sold nearly every photograph, but more importantly, we started conversations about representation in art, about the male gaze versus authentic female perspective, about love in all its complicated forms. The proposal happened exactly 1 year after opening night in the same Queens warehouse where we'd first displayed our truth to the world. I'd convinced Gwendolyn we were going to document the space one final time before the lease expired, which technically wasn't a lie. What I hadn't mentioned was the photographer I'd hired to capture the moment, or the fact that I'd been carrying an engagement ring for 2 months, waiting for the perfect moment that never seemed to come. In the end, perfect was overrated. Real was better. You know what's funny? Gwendolyn said as we walked through the empty space, our footsteps echoing off concrete walls. A year ago, I was just a model trying to book jobs. You were just a photographer, trying to please her father. Now look at us. What are we now? I asked, though I knew the answer. Ourselves, she said simply. Finally, completely ourselves. That's when I knew. Not because the moment was perfect, but because it was perfectly us standing in an empty warehouse, talking about identity and authenticity, surrounded by the ghosts of our first real artistic success. I dropped to one knee right there on the concrete floor. Gwendolyn's reaction was everything I dreamed of and nothing I could have scripted. First, she laughed, that bright, unguarded sound I'd fallen in love with during our very first session. Then she cried. Then she said yes before I'd even finished asking the question. Took you long enough, she added, echoing words she'd say. Again, months later, in front of a different audience. The ring was vintage. Like everything else, Gwendolyn loved an Art Deco sapphire that had belonged to my grandmother, the one person in my family who taught me that love was more important than reputation. It fit perfectly, which felt like the universe finally approving of our choices. We got married on a crisp October day, exactly 2 years after our first photo session. The ceremony was held in the gallery space we'd opened together in Soho, Victoria, and Gwendolyn Studios, specializing in authentic portraiture and social justice photography. The guest list was a mixture of everyone who'd supported us through the chaos and everyone we'd won over with our work. Maya, Gwendolyn's best friend who'd introduced us indirectly through her girlfriend's stories. Sarah, my college roommate who'd flown in from California. Artists we'd met through the exhibition, activists whose causes we documented, couples who'd hired us to capture their own authentic love stories. My father wasn't there. He'd reached out the month before, suggesting we meet for coffee to discuss recent developments. The meeting had been exactly as uncomfortable as expected, a mixture of disappointment that I'd thrown away my promising career and grudging respect for the success we'd built independently. But when I invited him to the wedding, he declined with a kind of polite corporate language that meant the door wasn't completely closed, but wasn't exactly open either. His loss, Gwendolyn said when I told her. Someday he'll realize he chose his reputation over his daughter, and that's going to hurt him more than it hurts you. She was probably right. But on our wedding day, surrounded by people who celebrated rather than merely tolerated our love, his absence felt more like freedom than loss. The ceremony was everything our relationship had become: intimate, honest, and unapologetically ourselves. I wore a custom suit designed by one of Gwendolyn's fashion friends, while she wore a vintage dress she'd found in a Brooklyn thrift shop and altered herself. The vows we wrote were too personal to share completely, but they centered around the same theme: promising to keep seeing each other clearly. Even when the world tried to tell us who we should be instead, the reception lasted until sunrise, with dancing and storytelling, and the kind of genuine celebration that can't be manufactured or posed. Our wedding photographer, a friend from art school who understood our aesthetic, captured it all. But I knew the most important images were the ones etched in memory. Gwendolyn laughing with my college friends. Our first dance to a song we'd discovered during one of our early Tuesday sessions. The moment when she pulled me aside and whispered, "Mrs. Alexander Bryant has a nice ring to it." 5 years later, as I write this story, Victoria and Gwendolyn Studios has become exactly what we dreamed it could be. We specialize in authentic portraiture engagement sessions that capture real relationships rather than Pinterest fantasies. Family portraits that show actual personalities instead of forced smiles, corporate headshots that reveal character rather than hiding it. But our real success isn't measured in bookings or revenue. It's in the messages we receive from young LGBTQ plus artists who say our exhibition gave them permission to create honestly. It's in the couples who hire us because they want their love documented with the same unflinching authenticity we brought to our own story. It's in the way we've never had to pretend to be anything other than exactly who we are. My father and I have a relationship now, though it's different from before. He was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's last year, and the progression has softened some of his harder edges. He started attending our exhibitions, never saying much, but always staying until the end. Last month, he asked if we might consider photographing his executive team's annual portraits. It's not forgiveness exactly, but it's recognition. And sometimes that's enough. Gwendolyn's mother has been sober for 3 years now, and we've become cautiously optimistic about rebuilding that relationship too. She visited us in New York for the first time last Christmas, bringing photo albums from Gwendolyn's childhood that I spent hours studying, trying to see traces of the woman I love in the fierce little girl with paint-stained fingers and grass-stained knees. We're thinking about expanding not just the business, but our family. The conversation started casually, the way important conversations often do. While we were developing prints late one Tuesday night, Gwendolyn mentioned the documentary she'd seen about LGBTQ plus adoption, and I confessed I'd been researching fertility clinics in our neighborhood. "You want kids?" she asked, pausing in her work to look at me across the dark room. "I want kids with you," I clarified. "I want to document their first steps and photograph their birthday parties and embarrass them at graduation by crying behind my camera." "You want to raise little artists who don't take any bullshit from anyone?" "Exactly. We're not pregnant yet, but we're trying. And whether our children come to us through biology or adoption, they'll grow up surrounded by images of authentic love in all its forms. They'll know that the most important thing about any photograph isn't the technical perfection. It's the truth it captures. You want to know the secret to a great photograph? It's not about the lighting or the composition or the expensive equipment. It's about trust. The trust between photographer and subject. The trust that allows someone to be vulnerable in front of your lens. The trust that what you capture will be treated with the respect it deserves. That's what I learned from Gwendolyn in that loft in Brooklyn during all those Tuesday afternoons when we were falling in love without naming it. She taught me that authenticity is a choice, not an accident. That the most beautiful images are often the most honest ones. That love, like art, requires courage. The photograph that started this whole story, Muse, unretouched, still hangs in our bedroom. Not as a reminder of the scandal it caused, but as evidence of what happens when we stop hiding from our own truths. It's a love letter captured in silver and light, proof that the best art comes from the places where we're brave enough to be completely vulnerable. Sometimes late at night when I'm developing prints and Gwendolyn is reading in bed, I think about all the photographs I took before I met her. Technically perfect, artistically sound, and completely soulless. I was so busy trying to capture what I thought people wanted to see that I forgot to look for what was actually there. Now, every photograph is a conversation between who someone is and who they're becoming. Every session is an opportunity to document truth in a world that's often more comfortable with fiction. And every day I get to wake up next to the woman who taught me the difference between taking pictures and making art.